Hello, everyone. This is Fadi, and I'd like to welcome you back to this fascinating series that we've been doing here, myself and my dear brother, Dr. David Wood, who is with me here in studio. Welcome back, brother. The topic, of course, has been atheism and Islam, but we did break it down into a number, basically, of episodes dealing with different topics. For instance, we dealt with God, atheism, and the meaning of life. We dealt with God, atheism, and morality last time, and we want to build upon that today. And today's topic will be focusing on moral arguments for God's existence. And really, one of the primary reasons why we wanted to go in that direction is that, if you watch last week's episode, you'll notice that David made a compelling argument stating that, aside from feelings, basically for an atheist, if you would reject, for instance, the moral behavior of the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, then you're going to have a foundation to support your decision, because otherwise, why are you rejecting someone else's behavior based on his own belief and based on a different cultural background and so on and so forth? So that will be today's focus, which is moral arguments and how that leads really to prove the existence of God. Welcome back, brother.
Thank you, sir.
So, how can we tackle this issue, especially when it comes to Muslims who believed in the existence of God, who believed in Muhammad at some point, who followed his own laws, and now they're rejecting him altogether based on his behavior?
Yeah, my overall perspective would be you have a kind of dilemma here. You need to pick one.
We're all about dilemmas here.
Yeah, we do lots of dilemmas. But basically, when a Muslim rejects Islam and Muhammad on some sort of moral grounds, they're opposed to the violence in Islam, they're opposed to the killing of apostates and to the terrorism, or they're opposed to the treatment of women, or to Muhammad's relationship with a 9-year-old girl, whatever they're opposed to. If it's a moral objection, then if they become atheists, I'd say they've got a choice to make. Either you need to acknowledge the implications of atheism and abandon the moral objection to Muhammad, reject him for some other reason, but not for moral reasons, or you need to rethink your foundation and come up with a basis for why those things are wrong. Again, as you pointed out, beyond your feelings, right? We know that you can feel that some behavior is wrong. If we're asking why it's really, really wrong, and different cultures at different times feel that things are. Notice, because last time we talked about a young woman who walks down the street without a male escort in Pakistan. Her own family will beat her to death. Think about it. The brother who beats her to death, he feels more strongly about his moral convictions than most people in the West do about anything they believe in. Right? He feels so strongly he's willing to kill for it, and to possibly go to jail if they're going to bother to convict him. So he's willing to radically alter his family, his own future, everything, because he feels so strongly that what she did has to be avenged. And so
absolutely, and I want to interject something that relates to what you just mentioned. When I appeared on satellite program for the first time with Brother Rashid back in December of 2007, a Muslim woman from Saudi by the name Fatima al-Mutairi accepted Christ. And then almost 9 months later, in August of 2008, I was sitting with Rashid when he passed a note to me and says, her father and brother discovered that she is a Christian and they killed her. I'm not aware of any punishment to date, actually, by anyone against the perpetrators, but which basically, from the community standpoint, they did an honor killing, and they basically saved the face of Islam, technically speaking, which goes along, what you just mentioning.
Yeah. So the idea here is if you're saying, well, what are you talking about? I can condemn Muhammad. Of course you can. What's the basis for it? Is the basis just your feelings? If it is, and you're saying that's justification, well, the guy who kills his sister, he has strong feelings. Is that a justification? We want to say that there's something that there are moral standards that are independent of our feelings and beliefs about them, right? So this is this is the language of objectivity and subjectivity, right? We say that something is objective if it's independent of the way we feel about it, right? We say it's subjective if it depends on our feelings. So a claim, the classic example is, if you claim that chocolate ice cream is better than vanilla ice cream, there's nothing in ice cream that tells you whether that's true or not. It's just how you feel about it. And someone might disagree with it.
I disagree.
Yeah,
Vanilla is always best.
My son, he only likes vanilla ice cream. So some people prefer vanilla. And notice there's no correct answer here. It's subjective. It depends.
That's
right. It's called subjective because it depends on the subject, right? You're a subject, I'm a subject. So
Not objective, basically. Yeah.
we say that something is objective when it depends on something outside of us, right? And so the idea here is, when we talk about objective moral values, these are moral values that are true regardless of what we believe. So even if we all concluded that torturing old ladies for fun is good, that wouldn't make it good. It would still be wrong. We would all be wrong for holding the wrong view. So when we talk about things being objectively wrong, what we're asking the atheist is, when you say Muhammad was wrong, are you talking about your own feelings? Are you saying that you're wired in this way? Are you saying that your culture taught you this, taught you to believe that this is wrong? Mm-hmm. Or are you saying that he did something objectively, morally wrong, that's wrong in spite of what he thought about it, that's wrong in spite of what everyone else thinks about it? If you're saying that, then you've got a problem. And this should lead into a moral argument for God's existence. And there are lots of different forms. We're going to look at William Lane Craig's version of the moral argument just because it's a popular version nowadays. Again, there are tons of different forms of the moral argument. Let's go ahead and check out William Lane Craig's version. So this is William Lane Craig. He is a philosopher. He has actually multiple doctorates. And as far as I know, is the most experienced Christian debater in history. He's been in hundreds of debates with atheist scholars around the world, and he's had quite a few debates with Muslims as well, such as Shabir Ali and Jamal Badawi and so on. But here's his moral argument. And the reason this is good is it condenses everything to two premises and a conclusion. Mm-hmm. But the first premise here is, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. And premise two is, objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore God exists. Now, the logical form of this argument here is called modus tollens. It's if A, then B, not B, therefore not A. And that's the logical form is indisputable. So to give a simpler example, if it's not a cat, if it's a cat, then it's a mammal. That's true, right? If it's a cat, then it's a mammal. Premise two, it's not a mammal.
Therefore, it's not a cat.
Therefore, it's not a cat, right? It can't be. So notice that. So that's the logical form of Craig's argument here. So logically is what we call a valid argument, and that all we mean when we say valid is that if the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true, right? Doesn't mean that the premises are true. If an argument has valid logic and true premises, then we say that the argument is sound. We have a sound argument. We have valid logic, meaning that the conclusion actually follows from the premises, and you're starting out with true premises, guaranteeing a true conclusion. So let's go back to the slide there and check out the first premise, and then we'll take a closer look at this.
And if we can unpack it for our people, in case they're not familiar with some of these terminologies.
So Craig argues, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. If God does not exist, so if atheism is true, you could say, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. All right, so this would just go back to what we were talking about in the last video, that if God doesn't exist, if there's no God as the source of and just to clarify the terms he's using there, objective moral values and duties. So he's talking about objective, things that go beyond our feelings and our beliefs.
That's right.
And he has moral values and duties. Values are things that are good or bad, like a human being is intrinsically a good thing, who's worth something. That's a moral value. Duties are things that we're supposed to do, that those can be right or wrong, right? Actions can be right or wrong. And so you have a duty to perform certain actions and duty not to perform other actions. So you have objective moral values, things that are good or bad. what's the standard of those, and actions that are right or wrong. So Craig argues basically similar to what we talked about in the last video, namely that if atheism is true, there are only a couple places to go for your moral views, for your moral claims. You can appeal to the way you're wired. That doesn't give you anything like an objective moral value or duty. Saying I'm wired to do this, well, this guy's wired to be violent, this guy's wired to, be nice, this guy's wired this way, this guy's wired that way, an animal is wired this way. None of that tells you about objective right and wrong or good and bad. So that doesn't help you get objective moral values and duties. Alternatively, society, appealing to society for your moral standards doesn't help you get to anything objective in terms of morality. Because as you point out, they contradict each other, right? You go to one society, they will kill you for walking down the street without a male escort. You go to another city, they would never do that, would never think about doing that. Very, very different moral standards. And so society doesn't give you anything objective. And that's why, if you say that society determines what's right and wrong, you become a kind of cultural relativist. Society decides what's right and wrong. So there's nothing objective about that. So notice these things are kind of saying the exact opposite. If you're saying that society decides, then you're saying that our feelings and beliefs decide what right and wrong is. When we talk about objective moral values and duties, we're saying, is there right and wrong that's independent of what we think and we believe? And so much so that even if we were all wrong, we would simply be wrong. So all that first premise is saying is that if God doesn't exist, if there's no standard of good, then all we're left with are things that can't possibly be a foundation for objective moral values and duties. We could still believe that things are right and wrong. We could still be wired to believe that things are right and wrong. We could still be influenced by our society to say that certain things are right and wrong. We could still feel like certain things are right and wrong, but they're not objectively right and wrong. It depends on our thoughts and feelings. So that's really all the first premise is saying. Without the standard that goes beyond us, all that's left is us and our feelings, and we all disagree with each other on all kinds of things.
Of course. Yeah.
So if there's nothing that goes beyond us, then we're just left with things that can't possibly serve as a basis for objective moral values and duties. So good on that?
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely. So
notice if we agree with the first premise, as I certainly did. When I was an atheist, I agreed with that. That is absolutely correct. If God doesn't exist, then there are no objective moral values and duties, and therefore I can kind of do what I want. All right, let's go back to the slide. We'll check out the next premise. So going back through the argument again, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise 2, objective moral values and duties do exist. Now, this is a little trickier to affirm because objective moral values and duties aren't exactly things that you can point to. You know what I mean? You don't go out and find them with a telescope or a microscope. You don't find them in the lab. Yeah. If two people are looking at or watching the same behavior, let's suppose we see someone who's torturing an old lady. If one person says, hey, that's objectively morally wrong, and the other person says, it's objectively morally fine, there's no evidence in what's going on that tells you who's right and who's wrong. So it's not something that you find empirically by going out and investigating. But there are certain things that are just like that, right? Like logical laws and so on. You can't point to them. You don't find them with a telescope, but they're still binding and authoritative. Mathematics, right? 2 + 2 = 4. You don't go out and find the mathematical rules around you can apply them. You can apply mathematical rules. You can say, oh, here's 2 of these and 2 of these, and that equals 4, and that's what we call it, and so on. So you can apply mathematical rules and so on. But mathematics is it's conceptual. They're concepts. They exist in the mind, not out there. And so moral values and duties are more in that ballpark, that like logical laws, like mathematical rules, they're concepts, they exist in the mind. So the question is, are they nothing but illusions? Are these just kinds of illusions? Mm-hmm. Well, the idea here is that people have moral experience, right? They can look at someone being tortured for no reason and say that's morally wrong. And they have a kind of intuition about that that's similar to like a mathematical intuition or recognizing a good argument from a bad argument. They understand that there are things like moral responsibility, where if you've done this, then if you've done this good thing, then you might be worthy of praise. If you have done this bad thing, then you're worthy of blame or perhaps punishment. They understand that there can be moral improvement, that this guy who was horrible and selfish became a better person, and that is actually improvement, right? Notice if you're saying this guy actually morally improved,
and what are you basing it on?
yeah, and either it's just your feelings, or he actually morally improved. And so here's the idea. People in general have a kind of moral experience where some things are really right and really wrong. And we would say, what if every person in the world decided that Hitler was right? We would want to say, then every person in the world was wrong, would be wrong, right? We want to say he was wrong regardless. If he's violating human rights, especially to that extent, it's just wrong, and it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter if everyone agreed with him, or if he'd won, it wouldn't matter. And if that's our position, that there are certain things that can be right and wrong, good or bad, independent of what we say about them, or independent of who wins, then we're acknowledging that there are things that are objectively right and wrong, objectively good and bad. Now, it's possible to bite the bullet here and say, actually, it's all just a matter of feeling, right?
Right.
And that's why we said, if an atheist decides to go that route, he just has to say, well, okay, then I agree. Muhammad didn't do anything really wrong. He just did things that I don't like, which doesn't actually serve as a good basis for rejecting him. You'd have to reject him on other grounds. So you can go that route. But as I pointed out, in fact, the vast majority of atheists still cling to things being objectively right and wrong. So for instance, many atheists will complain about God, right? They'll complain about God. Why did God do this? Why didn't God do that? Why doesn't God come down? Why doesn't God come down here and do this? Notice what they're doing in that situation. And this is almost every atheist you'll run into. Notice what they're doing. They're saying that there are moral values that go so far beyond us that even God has to obey them. And they're saying that we're aware of them, right? So this flies in the face of their claims that, morality is just, subjective feelings and so on. If you're saying God should have done this, God ought to have done that, you're saying there are moral values that go massively beyond us and that you're aware of them. So again, an atheist can bite the bullet and say, yes, I'm not actually saying ever again that anything is really right or really wrong. I'm just telling you my feelings about that. That's not what the vast majority of atheists want to do. They still want to cling to the idea that there are things that are objectively right, objectively wrong, objectively good, objectively bad. But notice, if they want to do that, let's go back to the argument. William Lane Craig's moral argument. If God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Why is that? Well, again, if there's nothing that goes beyond ourselves, no standard that goes beyond ourselves, then all you're left with are foundations that can't possibly be foundations of objective moral values and duties. So premise 1 is true, but premise 2 is also true. Even atheists acknowledge that there are objective moral values and duties, so they agree that objective moral values and duties do exist. But guess what? If you put those two premises together, the conclusion follows necessarily from them, therefore God exists. And so here's the interesting situation that we have that needs to be brought to the surface. You've got atheists who are horrified at the things that Muhammad did and taught, the things that the Quran teaches. They're horrified at these things. They say these are wrong, these are immoral. And they say, we're going to become atheists and we're going to fight against those things. Not realizing that by acknowledging that those things are wrong, by claiming that and believing that those things are objectively, morally wrong, they've just provided evidence for theism, because their worldview can't account for that. Theism can. And as we've seen, you can have an argument that basically takes what they believe. Hey, if we go through this, you have to agree that apart from God, there are no objective moral values and duties, and yet you agree that there are objective moral values and duties. Guys, how do you not realize that you've just provided yourself evidence for the existence of God?
Absolutely. And of course, this is interesting because we're going to start tying this into future episodes. And with that, let's wrap it up and give people at least a flavor of what we will be discussing pretty soon here.
Well, we are normally we sort of keep the issues separate, right? We deal with issues with atheism when we're talking to atheists. We deal with issues with Islam when we're talking to Muslims. Right. But now we're kind of doing a crossover because there are people who are kind of in a crossover, right?
Exactly.
They leave Islam and become atheists, and so we're going to kind of bring these issues together by going through various issues in Muhammad's life that people will look at those and say those things are immoral. He should not have done those things. And yet, if they've become an atheist as a result of those things, they've actually lost the foundation. And so when Muhammad did that, it's not just a problem for Islam, it's a problem for atheism as well, so long as the atheist wants to say that that was immoral.
Absolutely, and you can see why it's going to be fascinating and a dilemma at the same time. Not for us, we're trying to help here. So I hope that you've found all of the videos that we've done so far in this series, which is so far we've been, titling it generically speaking, Islam and Atheism, for the obvious reason that some Muslims are leaving now and calling themselves atheists. Obviously, we're so excited that our dear brother David Wood here is the one that have joined us and decided to do this, I would consider to be pioneering, video series. I'm not aware of anyone so far that have tackled it from this perspective, but we're thankful if there's others as well, of course, that will be dealing with this, because at the end of the day, we want to invite those Muslims, young Muslims who are delusional about Islam to look into Christ as their only mean of salvation. Thank you, brother. And until we meet again, everybody, have a blessed day. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. We can't make these quality videos without the help of partners like you. So please consider becoming a Patreon supporter today at patreon.com/Sira International. I want to make sure you always get notified when we release a new video. So please click the bell to be notified, and of course, make sure to subscribe to this channel. If this video was helpful to you, please click the thumbs up. Thank you.